Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now, let's step inside. After the transfer ends, how inmates are reabsorbed inside Louisiana State Penitentiary. For most people, a prison transfer feels like an ending. The doors close. The journey stops. The movement is over. From the outside, it appears as though the hardest part has already passed. The inmate has arrived. The system has finished moving them. Stability, at least in theory, should begin, but inside prisons like Angola, arrival is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of a much more dangerous phase. Because once the transfer ends, the system steps back, and something else steps forward in its place. Prison culture. This documentary begins after the transport vehicles are gone, after the paperwork is filed, and after the inmate is physically inside one of America's most complex and powerful prison environments. At Angola, the real test does not come from guards or gates. It comes from the population itself. Unlike supermax facilities designed to isolate, Angola is a prison that operates like a closed society. It has its own hierarchy, its own economy, its own rules that are never written down, but always enforced. Every inmate inside understands them, and every new arrival is measured against them. Transfers do not arrive as blank slates. They arrive with reputations, sometimes real, sometimes imagined. Other inmates want to know where you came from, why you were moved, and what kind of pressure you bring with you. Not through direct questioning, but through observation. How you walk, where you stand, who you avoid, who avoids you. Inside Angola, nothing goes unnoticed. For inmates transferred from other facilities, especially from higher security or specialized environments, the challenge is not survival in the physical sense. It is placement, finding where you fit inside a system that was not built to accommodate you. Some transfers arrive thinking the hardest part is over. That belief rarely lasts long, because Angola does not pause to make space for new people. Its routines, labor systems, and social structures continue without adjustment. The burden is on the transfer to adapt quickly, quietly, and correctly. This documentary is not about violence. It is about pressure. The pressure to work. The pressure to align. The pressure to understand unwritten rules before breaking them. Inside Angola, inmates are defined by function. Work assignments determine visibility. Visibility determines protection. Protection determines longevity. Transfers who fail to understand this chain find themselves isolated in ways that have nothing to do with official segregation. Here, isolation is social. The system does not need to punish transfers directly. It allows the environment to do that work. Long days of labor under open skies. Constant exposure to other inmates. A population that has already decided how things are done. For someone newly transferred, this can be more destabilizing than confinement. There is no silence to hide in, no anonymity to rely on, no protected transition period. Everything happens in full view. This is where many transfers make their most critical mistakes, not because they break rules, but because they misunderstand the culture. They assume Angola operates like the place they came from. It does not. The prison expects you to know your place before it tells you where that place is. Arrival is not the end. When a transfer arrives at a prison like Angola, the system treats the moment as complete. The vehicle is gone. The paperwork is finalized. The inmate has been processed and placed. From the institution's point of view, the task is finished. But inside the prison itself, arrival is not a conclusion. It is exposure. Unlike facilities designed around isolation or transit, Angola is an environment where inmates are constantly visible to one another. Yards are open. Work details are public. Housing arrangements place people into shared spaces where observation is unavoidable. There is no gradual transition from outsider to insider. The moment a transfer enters the population, they are being assessed. This assessment does not happen through confrontation or questioning. It happens through watching. Other inmates notice posture, movement, tone, and behavior within minutes. They observe how the transfer responds to instructions, how they interact with staff, how they position themselves in shared spaces. Nothing about this process is formal, but it is systematic. Inside Angola, Information moves quickly without being spoken. Inmates learn who is new, where they came from, and how they carry themselves long before any direct interaction occurs. The transfer may believe they are simply settling in, but in reality, they are already being placed within an unwritten structure. This is where many transfers misjudge the situation. After weeks or months of movement, uncertainty, and isolation elsewhere, arrival can feel like relief. There is routine again. There is space. There are people. But that sense of relief is deceptive. Angola does not offer anonymity. It offers visibility. And visibility carries risk. The prison's daily rhythm does not slow down for new arrivals. Work crews move out early. Count times are strict. Yard activity follows established patterns. Everyone already knows where they're supposed to be and what role they serve. A transfer enters this rhythm already behind. There is no orientation that explains how things really work. Official rules are posted, but they are incomplete. They describe what staff expect, not what the population enforces. Transfers who rely only on official guidance often struggle, because the most important rules are never written down. These rules govern respect, boundaries, and positioning, where you stand in line, who you sit near, how quickly you respond to orders, whether you speak, and when you stay silent. Inside Angola, these details matter more than reputation or history. Transfers who arrive with confidence built elsewhere may find that confidence misplaced. The prison does not care who you were before. It cares how you behave now. One of the first challenges for a transfer is understanding pace. Angola operates on labor. Fields, maintenance, kitchens, workshops, work defines daily life. Transfers are assigned tasks quickly, often without much explanation. These assignments are not just about productivity. They are about placement. Work determines visibility. Visibility determines interaction. Interaction determines status. A transfer who approaches work incorrectly, too aggressively, too passively, too independently, can draw unwanted attention, not from staff, but from other inmates who see behavior as a signal. This is where pressure begins to build. The transfer must learn how to exist within a population that already understands itself. They must read cues without asking questions, adjust behavior without guidance, observe without appearing to study. This balancing act is exhausting. Unlike isolation or transit, where uncertainty comes from silence, Angola's pressure comes from constant presence. There is always someone watching, always someone forming an opinion, always someone interpreting behavior. For transfers coming from environments where separation was the norm, this exposure can be overwhelming. There is no buffer, no quiet phase, no time to recalibrate. The prison expects adaptation immediately. This expectation is not enforced by punishment. It is enforced by consequence. Transfers who misread the environment may find themselves socially isolated, excluded from informal support networks, or assigned undesirable positions within work details. These outcomes are rarely announced. They simply happen. What makes this phase particularly difficult is that mistakes are not always obvious. A transfer may believe they are doing everything correctly, only to realize later that they have been quietly pushed to the margins. By then, reversing course is difficult. This is why arrival is often the most dangerous moment psychologically, not because of violence or confrontation, but because the margin for error is small and invisible. The prison does not warn you when you are failing to adapt. It lets you discover it through exclusion. By the end of this first phase, the transfer understands one essential truth. The system may have moved them here, but survival now depends on learning a culture that was never meant to be explained, being assessed by other inmates. At Angola, the most important evaluations do not come from staff. They come from the population. Long before a transfer understands where they stand, other inmates have already begun to decide. This process is quiet, constant, and far more precise than any official classification. It does not rely on interviews, paperwork, or confrontation. It relies on observation. Inside a prison society that has existed for generations, inmates become experts at reading people. They watch how a transfer walks across open ground, how they react when orders are given, how quickly they adjust when something changes, how they handle discomfort without drawing attention. These observations begin immediately, often within the first few hours of arrival, in shared spaces. And unlike staff evaluations, they are not limited to specific moments. Every movement is data. Every reaction is noted. What matters most is not confidence or toughness. It is alignment. Angola has a deeply established internal rhythm. Inmates know when to move, when to pause, when to speak, and when silence is expected. Transfers who arrive with habits learned elsewhere often struggle because those habits do not always translate. In this environment, behavior that feels neutral to the transfer can be interpreted as disrespect, uncertainty, or instability by others. Standing in the wrong place, responding too slowly, responding too quickly, looking around too much. None of these actions break official rules, but they signal unfamiliarity, and unfamiliarity attracts attention. Other inmates begin to categorize the transfer without discussion. Who do they associate with? Do they work smoothly within a group? Do they isolate themselves unnecessarily? Do they seem overly cautious or overly assertive? These judgments are not moral. They are practical. In a prison where people live and work together every day, predictability matters more than personality. Inmates want to know whether someone will disrupt the balance they depend on. Transfers who appear unpredictable, even unintentionally, are marked as risks. This does not mean immediate conflict. In fact, Angola's inmate culture often avoids open confrontation whenever possible. Instead, pressure is applied indirectly. Transfers may be excluded from informal conversations. They may receive less guidance about routines. They may find themselves placed at the edges of work details rather than integrated into the group. These signals are subtle but consistent. A transfer who understands what is happening may attempt to adjust, but adjustment requires knowledge, and knowledge is rarely offered freely. Angola's culture expects newcomers to learn by watching, not by asking. Asking too many questions can itself be a mistake. It signals dependence. It signals unfamiliarity. It signals a lack of awareness. At the same time, saying too little can also be misread. Silence without understanding can look like detachment or resistance. The transfer is forced to navigate a narrow path between observation and participation. This is mentally exhausting. Unlike formal systems, inmate assessment never pauses. There is no review period, no reset. Every day reinforces impressions formed earlier. A mistake made in the first week can echo for months because reputation inside prison culture is slow to change. What makes this process especially difficult for transfers is that they are being assessed without knowing the criteria. No one explains what matters. No one announces when they've noticed something. No one tells you when you've crossed an invisible line. Feedback comes only through consequences. A transfer may notice they're no longer included in certain work groups, or that people avoid sitting near them, or that guidance once offered casually has stopped. These changes rarely come with explanation. They are meant to be understood. At Angola, being assessed by other inmates is not about dominance or aggression. It is about compatibility. The population wants to know whether the transfer will fit into an ecosystem that already functions. Those who adapt quietly often find stability. Those who misread signals often find themselves isolated. And isolation inside an open prison environment can be more punishing than official segregation. It removes support, information, and protection, all without formal action. By the end of this phase, the transfer begins to understand a critical reality. No matter what the system decided before, their future inside Angola will be shaped far more by how other inmates interpret them than by anything written in their file. This realization changes behavior. Transfers become more cautious, more observant, more aware of their own presence. And that awareness sets the stage for the next phase, where work, labor, and usefulness determine whether a transfer remains on the margins or becomes part of the prison's internal structure. Work, labor, and prison value. At Angola, work is not optional. It is the foundation of everything. From the moment a transfer is absorbed into the daily rhythm of the prison, labor becomes the primary way they are measured, not by how hard they work in an official sense, but by what their work says about them to everyone else. In Angola, labor is visibility. Fields stretch across the prison grounds. Crews move together at dawn, and assignments repeat day after day under the same open sky. Unlike enclosed facilities where work can be hidden behind walls, Angola's labor system unfolds in full view of the population. Everyone sees who works. Everyone sees how they work. Everyone sees who struggles, who adapts, and who disrupts the flow. For a transfer, this exposure is immediate. Work assignments are often given quickly, with little explanation. There is no extended period to observe quietly from the sidelines. The prison assumes participation, and participation becomes a first true test of adaptation. But labor at Angola is not just about productivity. It is about function. Inmates are valued not for effort alone, but for reliability. Can you keep pace without slowing others down? Can you follow unspoken cues? Can you contribute without demanding attention? A transfer who works too slowly draws frustration. A transfer who works too aggressively draws suspicion. A transfer who works independently without regard for group rhythm draws concern. The goal is alignment. Crews operate on shared understanding. Tasks are divided informally. Experienced inmates know where to stand, when to move, and how to adjust without instruction. Transfers are expected to learn this quickly, not through explanation, but through observation. This is where many transfers struggle. After time spent in isolation or movement-heavy environments, the sudden demand for synchronized labor can feel overwhelming. The body must adjust to physical strain, while the mind works constantly to interpret social signals. Mistakes are rarely corrected directly. Instead, they are remembered. An inmate who consistently disrupts workflow may find themselves reassigned, not officially punished, but quietly moved to less desirable tasks. These changes are subtle, but they carry meaning. Within the prison culture, reassignment is commentary. It tells others where you stand. Work also determines access. Certain labor details come with informal privileges, better information, stronger social networks, and a degree of protection that does not appear in any rulebook. Transfers who integrate successfully into stable work crews gain more than routine. They gain legitimacy. Those who do not integrate often drift. Drifting is dangerous at Angola. An inmate without a clear function is watched more closely, not by staff but by the population. Idleness is interpreted as unpredictability, and unpredictability threatens balance. This is why Angola's labor system is such a powerful sorting mechanism. It separates those who can adapt quietly from those who cannot. It reveals temperament, patience, and social awareness without requiring confrontation. For transfers, the pressure is constant. Every day is an audition. You are evaluated not once, but repeatedly. Each morning you step into the field or onto a work detail. You reinforce or undermine the impressions already forming about you. And unlike official classifications, inmate judgments are slow to change. A transfer who proves reliable over time may earn acceptance. Not friendship, but recognition. Recognition that says, this person understands how things work here. That recognition matters. It influences where you sit during breaks, who speaks to you, who offers quiet guidance when something changes. These small interactions accumulate into stability. Without them, the prison feels colder, larger, and more isolating, even in open spaces. This is the paradox of Angola. It is physically expansive, yet socially unforgiving. For transfers, work is the bridge between outsider and participant. It is the only sanctioned way to demonstrate alignment without drawing attention. Those who understand this early often survive the transition with fewer consequences. Those who do not may spend months correcting impressions they never realized they were making. By the end of this phase, one truth becomes clear to every transfer. At Angola, you are not judged by where you came from. You are judged by how useful you are and how quietly you prove it. And once that judgment settles, it shapes everything that comes next. Learning the unwritten rules. At Angola, the most important rules are never posted. They are not written in handbooks. They are not explained during intake, and they are never enforced directly. Yet every inmate understands them. These unwritten rules govern how people move, speak, work, and exist together inside one of the largest prison populations in the United States. For a transfer, learning these rules is not optional. It is the difference between stability and constant pressure. What makes these rules so powerful is how quietly they operate. No one announces them. No one teaches them. No one warns you when you are about to break one. Instead, the rules reveal themselves through reaction. A glance held too long. A conversation that stops when you approach. A work crew that suddenly shifts positions. These are the signals. Transfers often arrive believing that official compliance is enough. They follow staff instructions. They avoid obvious conflict. They do what they are told. But Angola operates on a second layer of expectations that has nothing to do with staff authority. This layer belongs to the population. One of the first unwritten rules concerns space. Where you stand matters. Where you sit matters. Which path you take across open ground matters. Certain areas are informally claimed by groups, work details, or long-established inmates. These claims are rarely challenged openly, but they are respected universally. A transfer who wanders without awareness may unknowingly violate these boundaries. The response is rarely immediate. Instead, it comes later, in subtler forms: exclusion, correction through tone, or quiet redirection. Another unwritten rule involves speech. Talking too much draws attention. Talking too little draws suspicion. Angola values restraint. Conversations are brief and purposeful. Transfers who overshare personal history or ask direct questions too early may be perceived as seeking validation or testing boundaries. Both interpretations can be risky. Listening is safer than speaking. Observation is safer than inquiry. Even tone matters. A comment delivered too casually can be read as disrespect. A question asked at the wrong moment can disrupt rhythm. These mistakes are rarely forgiven quickly because they suggest unfamiliarity with the culture. Then there's the rule of visibility. At Angola, being visible is unavoidable, but drawing attention is discouraged. The ideal transfer blends into movement, participates without disruption, and avoids standing out to behavior or posture. Standing still when others move, moving when others pause, reacting emotionally when others remain neutral. Each of these actions breaks the rhythm of the environment. The prison does not correct these disruptions formally. The population does. Through silence, distancing, or subtle exclusion, transfers are reminded that they are out of alignment. Perhaps the most difficult unwritten rule to learn is timing. There are moments when interaction is acceptable and moments when it is not. Breaks, transitions, and informal pauses all have rhythms that experienced inmates instinctively understand. Transfers do not. A question asked at the wrong time. A request made too early. An attempt to connect when focus is elsewhere. These errors accumulate quietly. What makes this process especially challenging is that enforcement is never explicit. There is no confrontation, no clear feedback, and no opportunity to argue. The population expects transfers to recognize mistakes on their own. Those who do often adjust successfully. Those who do not continue to repeat errors without realizing it. This is where pressure intensifies. A transfer may sense that something is wrong without understanding why. Social interactions become colder. Work crews become less cooperative. Guidance that once appeared indirectly disappears entirely. The prison has not rejected them outright, but it has not accepted them either. This limbo is exhausting. Unlike official punishment, which has defined limits, social enforcement has none. It continues until behavior aligns. And alignment requires understanding rules that are never explained. Over time, most transfers learn to slow down. They watch more carefully. They speak less. They adjust posture, pace, and presence. These changes are rarely conscious at first, but they become instinctive. This is adaptation. The unwritten rules do not exist to punish. They exist to preserve stability. Angola's population enforces them because the environment depends on predictability. When everyone follows the same invisible script, conflict is minimized. Transfers who learn this eventually find a form of balance. Not comfort, not belonging, but predictability. And in a place like Angola, predictability is survival. By the end of this phase, the transfer understands something critical. You are not judged by your intentions. You're judged by how well you move within the rules no one explains. And once those rules are learned, truly learned, the prison begins to treat you differently, not as an outsider, but as someone who understands how things are done here, where transfers sit in the hierarchy. Every prison has a hierarchy, whether it admits it or not. At Angola, hierarchy is not built on official titles or sentences alone. It is built through time, consistency, and social positioning. Long before a transfer understands where they stand, the population has already begun to place them within an internal order that rarely changes quickly. This hierarchy is not announced. It is not enforced loudly, and it is never explained. Yet it governs nearly every interaction inside the prison. Transfers enter this structure at the bottom, not because they are weak or inexperienced, but because they are unknown. In a prison society that values predictability above all else, unfamiliarity is a liability. It takes time to demonstrate that you will not disrupt the balance others rely on. Hierarchy in Angola is shaped by duration. How long you have been there matters. How consistently you behave matters more. Inmates who have established stable routines, reliable work patterns, and predictable behavior occupy higher positions, not in authority, but in trust. That trust determines access to information, informal protection, and social tolerance. Transfers begin without any of that. They do not yet know who holds influence. They do not yet understand which voices carry weight. They do not yet recognize which conflicts are historical and which are temporary. Because of this, transfers are watched carefully, not with hostility, but with caution. One of the most important aspects of hierarchy at Angola is non-interference. Experienced inmates understand when to stay out of matters that do not concern them. Transfers often do not. They may offer opinions, react visibly to situations, or insert themselves into conversations without understanding the history behind them. These actions can be costly, not because they provoke immediate response, but because they mark the transfer as someone who does not yet understand the social map. That perception slows acceptance and limits opportunity. Hierarchy also determines exposure. Inmates higher in the informal structure often have more predictable days. They work familiar details. They interact with known groups. Their position, while still confined, carries a degree of stability. Transfers do not have this. They are more likely to be moved between work details, reassigned without explanation, or placed in positions that keep them visible but unprotected. These placements are not punishments. They are tests. The population observes how the transfer responds. Do they complain? Do they adapt? Do they withdraw? Do they overcompensate? Each response feeds into the ongoing assessment. What makes Angola's hierarchy particularly difficult to navigate is that it does not reward ambition. Attempts to rise quickly are often interpreted as impatience or misunderstanding. The prison does not value those who seek status. It values those who avoid disrupting it. Patience is currency here. Transfers who understand this slow their pace. They stop trying to prove anything. They focus on consistency rather than visibility. Over time, this behavior begins to change how they are perceived. But even then, movement within the hierarchy is incremental. A transfer may earn quiet acknowledgement, a nod, a brief conversation, inclusion in routine tasks, long before they earn anything resembling trust. These moments are small, but they are significant. They indicate that the prison is beginning to recognize the transfer as stable. Without that recognition, life inside Angola becomes harder. Isolation at this stage is not physical. It is social. Transfers may find themselves surrounded by people, but excluded from networks that provide guidance and informal support. This isolation can be more draining than confinement because it offers no clear boundary. You are present everywhere, but included nowhere. Over time, most transfers settle into one of three positions within the hierarchy. Some adapt successfully. They find a steady place, maintain consistent behavior, and become part of the prison's rhythm. They are not influential, but they are accepted. Others remain on the margins. They are tolerated, but not integrated. Their days are marked by limited interaction and reduced access to informal networks. They exist without drawing attention, but without support. A smaller number never adapt fully. They continue to misread signals, disrupt routines unintentionally, or fail to align with expectations. These transfers often experience prolonged social pressure that does not escalate into confrontation, but never fully eases. What determines which path a transfer follows is rarely a single action. It is accumulation, small behaviors repeated daily, consistent responses to pressure, a willingness to observe rather than assert. Hierarchy at Angola is not something you climb. It is something you are slowly placed into, whether you realize it or not. By the end of this phase, the transfer understands a difficult truth. Inside Angola, your position is not decided by where you came from or what you did before. It is decided by how reliably you fit into a system that existed long before you arrived. And once that position settles, it shapes every day that follows. When the transfer truly ends, by the time a transfer is fully settled into a prison like Angola, nothing feels new anymore. The routines are familiar. The faces are recognizable. The rules, written and unwritten, are understood. From the outside, it may look like the transfer is complete. But what actually ends is something far less visible. What ends is uncertainty. The prison no longer watches the transfer as closely. The population no longer studies every movement. Work assignments stabilize. Daily rhythms stop shifting. The pressure that once felt constant begins to fade into the background. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes predictable. Inside Angola, predictability is the closest thing to acceptance. It signals that the transfer has been placed. Not necessarily welcomed, not necessarily trusted, but understood. The prison now knows what to expect, and that knowledge reduces tension on all sides. For some transfers, this outcome feels like relief. They have learned how to move without drawing attention. They understand where they fit, what is expected of them, and what must be avoided. Their days follow a rhythm that no longer requires constant adjustment. For others, the outcome is quieter and heavier. They may never fully integrate. They may remain on the edges of prison society, tolerated but not included, visible but unsupported. Their isolation is not enforced by walls, but by distance, social, not physical. And for a smaller number, adaptation never fully takes hold. These transfers continue to struggle against a culture they do not understand or cannot accept. They live under constant pressure, not because the prison targets them, but because they never fully align with its expectations. What unites all of these outcomes is a simple truth. The transfer does not end when movement stops. It ends when the prison decides who you are allowed to be inside it. This decision is never announced. It is never written down, and it is never revisited easily. It is shaped by time, repetition, and the quiet judgment of a population that has learned how to survive together. Once it settles, it becomes part of daily life, invisible but powerful. Understanding this process changes how we think about prison transfers. It reminds us that confinement is not only about walls and sentences, but about social systems that operate alongside official authority. Systems that absorb people, measure them, and assign them places without ever asking for consent. For those who live inside them, adaptation is not a choice. It is a requirement. And once that adaptation is complete, the prison no longer needs to exert pressure. The environment does that work on its own. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.